We can start to put a crack in the schema. The schema is certain that this is the way it is and nothing will change it. But if we can put a crack in that foundation, perhaps that we can create change. The reason I've learned how to do these better is because I've done all of these worse than probably anybody will do them. If you had some sort of traumatic experience, you've likely created what's called a maladaptive schema that you're not even aware of anymore, can still be limiting you, challenging you, and making it hard for you to be successful today. So on this video, I'm gonna break down some schemas for you. Schema psychologists have discovered that there's essentially 5 different types of early maladaptive schemas that are likely to form in early childhood that can dominate you later when you're an adult. And of these 5, there are 18 subcategories of schemas. So let's break down the 5 types first. There's disconnection, there's impaired autonomy, impaired limits, other directedness, and then there's hypervigilance. So if you're struggling with any area of your life, chances are there is a maladaptive schema that will fall under one of these 5 types. So let's look at disconnection first. I've found a lot of people that I've worked with, they fall under the disconnection of either abandonment, mistrust, deprivation, shame, and isolation. So abandonment looks like this, as they have a chronic anxiety about losing something or someone that's close to them. Because probably at some point in time in their life, they reached for someone and they weren't there. And they interpreted that as don't get attached, because it could go away just like that. On the other side of it, there's these exaggerated expectations that eventually everyone will leave them. Some of the ways you see this behavior exhibited is clinginess, is neediness, is controlling, jealousy. And so one of the ways that this helped me is when I'd see these types of behavior, I wouldn't take it so personal. I get where this is coming from. Doesn't mean I have to be okay with it, but it means that I can have a deeper understanding of that individual and more of an appreciation of the experiences that that individual has. Now, this allows empathy. Empathy is the kryptonite to resistance of change. Number 2 is mistrust. You'll see these people exhibit paranoia and look at everybody else as untrustworthy, who think everyone's out to get them. They will even manipulate and lie because they feel like the other person's going to lie and manipulate. And so they better do it first as a means of self-protection. So when I'm working with clients like this, we lean into the mistrust. We get them to mistrust their own false beliefs. Number 3, deprivation. So these are people that have shut off, ignored, or completely somehow blocked off their own emotional needs. I had some of these issues myself, where emotions were a sign of weakness, and if I could shut them off and think only logically, then I can make better decisions. So when I'm looking at clients that they're full drive logic and they're shut off emotionally, I understand that we have to work very cautiously around any emotionally charged situations. But at the same time, there's a way that we can present emotional logic, as I call it. Emotion can be accessed from the framework of logic, and that's very interesting because most people create this false dichotomy where logic is over here and emotion is over there, and none of those two mix together. So we can have logical communication about emotions, we can have emotional communications about logic. Therefore, shame. Something is wrong or defective with the self. They're fearful that these defects can be exposed, and they're hypersensitive to criticism. It wasn't very obvious to me till I got older. You don't have to do anything for unconditional love. If you can run somebody through a thought exercise where they depersonalize themselves in the situation and look at it from somebody else's perspective. This is where we can start to put a crack in the schema. So if there's a lot of deep shame going on here with a client, I am going to be extra careful with when I give them critical feedback. This doesn't mean we treat everybody with kitty gloves and bubble wrap, because then we don't create resilience. But it just means before I can help somebody, I got to connect with them. Before I connect with them, I have to understand them. And this is one of the ways in which I understood them. So until we work with that, we're not going to really help somebody. Isolation. So this is the last one under this category, is you don't feel like you belong anywhere. You feel different, alien from everyone else around you. You see this with a lot of people that are socially anxious. Something happened early on where it didn't feel right and it never got correct. And now this person doesn't even feel comfortable in their own skin. And so when I see somebody who feels like they're misaligned or disconnected, then we are very, very careful in how we create a communication framework, because all communication is predicated around connection. One of the easiest ways in order to do this is start somebody out by piling on things that they can do in isolation. A lot of creative work is very lonely. I wrote this book here, One to Many. You should buy it. It's many, many, many hours alone. If I see a client who tends to be isolation, I want to load that client up at first with a lot of things that they can do on their own. And then when they come back to me, I can begin to understand them so they feel there's a little bit connection. Now let's talk about the second type early maladaptive schema, which is impaired autonomy. And this is dependence, vulnerability, enmeshment, and failure. These are the subcategories under impaired autonomy. So the first one, dependence, is you're unable to make decisions, you have trouble organizing and completing daily tasks, you lack individual voice and intuition. This is usually formed early on because you had somebody take care of everything for you to a detrimental degree. If somebody else is making all your decisions for you, then that can be very dangerous. My dad, when he had a stroke, he lost a sense of autonomy where other people started doing things for them. And some people, best intention, started to do too much for him. So observing these people that have this dependence is you breed a set of dependence to you under the right new circumstances. Make them dependent on you, but they have to do X, Y, and Z and do 1, 2, and 3 in order to get that dependence. Second one is vulnerability. These are individuals that fear that there's an impending doom. They have an exaggeration of a perception that terrible things are going to happen to them, and that, more importantly, they'll be unable to protect themselves from it. And so what we have to do most often, overload that sense of that impending doom. When a client starts to run that way with me, I'd be like, yeah, we should just stop. What matters anyway? You create this thing or you don't create this thing. Somebody's going to break in, they're going to steal it, they're going to deface it, they're going to blow it up. It's all going to go to hell, isn't it? And then I get them to start to reflect on, when do we know it's appropriate to be concerned? And that's really powerful. Enmeshment. I see this a lot, this unstable sense of self. Where do I end and where does somebody else start? This inability to feel whole without somebody else. When I see people that are highly unaware of themselves, I say, okay, I have to frame this in a way that's not about the self. And then over time, how can I get them to start being more assertive with the self so I can really grow them up, empower them? And that's really effective. And then failure. People are afraid that no matter what they're going to do, they're going to fail in life. These are the people that are prone to self-sabotage. Often, they put in massive effort to overcome these feelings of failing and lack and the inability to be loved just for who they are. I have attempted to put so much effort in to overcome these feelings of failure by showing and proving that I could achieve. The problem with that has come from the perspective of you're running away from something. And no matter what it is, when you're running away from something, there's tension, there's fear, it's stressful. I want them to run away from something and run towards something to start with. Third type, called impaired limits. There's only two here. It's grandiosity and insufficient control. Most people, something bad happens to them, they take it personal as a deficiency. But in some instances, like with grandiosity here, people feel superior to others. They focus only on their strengths. They minimize their flaws. This can be created as a maladaptive schema in households where they have been raised by others to feel they are superior. These are pretty easy people for me to deal with. If I have to make them feel they're better than me to get it, all day long. But along the way, I also realize that if I give in to that, they're going to operate in ways that are going to be counterproductive to them long term. And so working on helping them understand and measure what is important, what isn't important, regardless of the individual. More on values, less on ego, and sorting that stuff out. Being a little bit more loose in the framework, knowing that they don't respond to rules, or developing rules that I know they will intentionally violate, but in a way that's powerful. And then the second one here is insufficient control. Impulsive, unreliable, disorganized. They have trouble enduring discomfort before they tap out. They focus mostly on short-term gratification. With these individuals, my number one strategy is I will give them short-term gratification. I will build very short-term plans. And then we can build this tension of, well, I want to do more. This helps counteract some of the schema of this insufficient control. And then over time, when you step back and you analyze it, see, you did this. You couldn't do this before. And then we can update the schema potentially. Other directedness is another top level maladaptive early schema. And this manifests itself with subjugation, self-sacrifice, and approval. Subjugation. This is where one's own needs are not as important. So you just suppress your needs to avoid rejection. And you end up feeling weak and powerless. One of the ways that I help clients there is I get them to advocate their own needs by being deliberately naive. Be like, what do you want? Is that really what you want? I'm not sure if that's what you want or not. So they get frustrated and then they start to vocalize it. So this is one of the ways you can deal with these clients is start to get them to advocate for their own needs by being intentionally dense. Now, the other one that goes along with subjugation is self-sacrifice. And this was me to a T. I was putting the needs of others ahead of myself. And I thought this was a good thing. One day, my therapist, she says, you ever heard of the drama triangle? There is the persecutor, there is the victim, and then there is the rescuer. And I always thought I was styling in my life because I was never the persecutor. I never go out and intentionally put other people down to make myself feel better. And I never seen myself as the victim. I would say, listen, a bad thing might have happened to me, but it doesn't have to define me. Turns out I was a rescuer. I'm going to put myself last. I'm going to put everybody else first. And then that's how I will be first. Now, these people they're often very stressed and overwhelmed because they give too much of themselves to everybody else. else, and then they break down. It's just really easy to work with these clients. I get them to start to put my needs first as opposed to their needs, and my needs are for them to take care of themselves, for them to create boundaries, for them to know when it's okay to help other people and when it's not okay to help other people. Approval is the last one in this category, which is self-worth based on the opinions of others, the desire to fit in, focusing oftentimes on money, status, appearance, and really a lack of sense of self. Self is defined by achievement, by notoriety, by a power, by a class. For me, these are very easy people to work with. And I can allow them a situation to fit in because if we put the same type of people together who stand out in the same ways, they will fit in with each other. So I attempt to do more of that as well, for them to understand that they can fit in, but they don't have to fit in by conforming to what the status quo is, literally fitting in by standing out. And then there's hypervigilance. And this has the 4 categories of negativity, inhibition, unrelentingness, and punitiveness. Negativity is obsession about not making mistakes, chronic anxiety, and rumination of the future. I have some of this, the obsession over not making mistakes. And it's really harmed me and others in my life along the way. Because if you did 19 things right, but you missed the 20th, the focus is on what you missed, not on what you did. And you start to feel really crummy because there's always faults. And the obsessiveness over not making these mistakes and the chronic anxiety associated with the potential of making mistakes, it can make you very successful, high achiever, but very empty inside. I learned this from Dan Sullivan. He says the gain, not the gap. So where you're at right now, where you want to go is the gap. Where you were vis-a-vis where you're at, that's the gain. Focusing as much on, if not more on, the gain as opposed to the gap can help counteract some of this. But also just bringing in more into the now. What's perfect about the present? Inhibition, this is the person who values self-control, very little playfulness, very strict, very reserved. And in this particular case, we start with this ability to be highly structured and to be very strict. And then we point it at activities that are spontaneous. How do we be spontaneous in the strictest way possible? And that's very fun because what people realize is it's not this or that. It can be both. We can bring playfulness into strictness. We can bring strictness into playfulness. You got to meet them with that tone. If you come in animated, hot and heavy and excited and pumped up and they're reserved, you mismatched them. You've lost them, right? So you take that very somber tone. Okay, this is what's going to happen. There's unrelentingness, which is the strive to meet rigorous, extreme standards, perfectionism, obsession to detail, highly critical of self and others. A lot of entrepreneurs, they fall into these categories, and you got to realize that perfectionism leads to pain every single time. Perfectionism is the ultimate imperfect action, and imperfection is the true perfection of the human condition. Now, I can't lay that conclusion down on clients immediately when they come to the table. They'll kick it out of their schema immediately. So instead, we allow them the rigorousness in a way that can create flexibility. And then punitiveness, the very last one here. These are the people that believe that mistakes should be punished, not forgiven. They're very intolerant of others and really ultimately intolerant of themselves. They downplay the circumstances and they upplay the characteristics. In the entrepreneur world, it's like all the customers are lazy and they never get anything done. We see this a lot with cancel culture, where people, they take delight in other people being punished and they never give them any forgiveness. And if that person somehow bounces back, there's a spitefulness that hangs over that person by the mob that is Twitter. Now, I'm not saying that you should automatically forgive somebody immediately when they've done harm to you. I had a client where he kept saying, I understand you're the marketing expert, but he wanted reassurance before they signed up as a client. And I was having my assistant deal with this. I just kept saying, take it away from him. Take it away from him. He's like, I just need to know if Jason can do this. I always told her to say the same thing. I don't think you're ready. When you're ready, let me know. And then he'd come back again. And then he finally signed up, and I was very forthright with him on the call. So you shift the focus on outcome. You shift the focus more on insight. And that can help in these situations. So there you go. A video deep dive for you on schemas. I wanted to bring this to you because most people don't talk about it. And also, a lot of people in this world are unaware of it. And the people in the schema world, they seem to be stuck in the schema world. So this is a bridge between the two. Hopefully these have helped you with considering looking at and examining your own schemas and maybe updating some of them. If nothing else, I'm sure it's going to help you with your communication with others, because a lot of us, we come to the table as damaged goods. And so if we can finesse around that and heal that and help that and communicate to that, we become better, and so does the other person. I'll see you in the next video.